I talk about what the Adam and Eve story is, I think, actually trying to do. And if it's understood, I think properly, it's irrelevant for evolution. It just has nothing to do with it, because it's not the story of the first person. It's a metaphor for Israel's existence, which begins with Adam is created out of dust. He's placed into a paradise garden and given a command to follow. If you keep it, you'll live. If you disobey, on the day you eat of it, you shall die. Right? The fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. Well, on the day that he eats of it, he and Eve are kicked out of the garden. They're exiled out of the garden, which is a form of death in the Old Testament. So you have Adam and Eve created, put into a land, given a command to follow. If you keep it, you stay. If you break it, you're exiled.
Is that when we fell?
Well, that's just it. See, that's
It is a fall. I hear you guys.
What kind of a fall is it, right?
I don't know. Christians always say the fall, and it was like some historical event, right?
Well, that's how many talk about it,
and
right?
And then the dinosaurs came into the garden because they were kicked out.
That's more fundamentalism than evangelicalism.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, what is the fall? What is that? Or what is
exactly? What is the fall? That gets the thing is that the whole point is that what is the story actually saying, right? Is it a fall from, like, let's say, perfection to something being marred? Or is it, in the story, the logic of the story, two beings who are innocent, naive, who are outwitted by a talking serpent who's crafty, and they're not crafty enough? And the result of that is a punishment, right, to the woman, and pangs in childbirth, which probably...
Making the garden great again.
Making the garden great again, right? But the pangs in childbirth of the woman are probably best understood as trouble in childbirth. What does that mean? Well, read the rest of the book of Genesis and see where this story goes. There's constant trouble with childbearing, beginning with Cain and Abel. There's sibling dysfunction. Sarah is barren, and then Hagar has Ishmael, and then later they have Isaac, but there's rivalry between the brothers. Jacob and Esau, I mean, that's a mess, right? And Jacob's two wives and two, slave woman concubines, that's a mess. And everybody wants to have children. So, it's not so much, this explains why women scream when they have babies. It's a story of, read the rest of Genesis, and that blessing to be fruitful and multiply is now marred. There's a problem with it, right? So you have that. With Adam, what's the punishment to Adam? It's going to be hard for you to grow things out of the ground. The Hebrew word for ground is Adamah. The word for man is Adam. Man is taken from the ground, and now you're going to have trouble. You're not going to get along with what you were taken out of, so to speak. And on top of that, you're going to work hard your whole life, and then you're going to die. What's missing in that story entirely, 100%, is, oh, and by the way, from now on, everyone born is going to be born in the state of sin that they can't get out of.
So because Adam ate an apple, I don't get to live forever? I wouldn't be like...
Right, so I don't think the story of Adam and Eve is addressing those kinds of questions. It's addressing really the question of Israel, meaning Israel is also created like Adam out of the dust of slavery, put into a paradise land, the land of Canaan, given command to follow the law of Moses. If you keep it, you stay. If you disobey, guess what? You're exiled just like Adam is. It's like Israel's whole existence, what the Old Testament is talking about, the struggle to keep land. And what happens if you get kicked out of it? Do you get to come back?
Why does God kick things out? It seems like a God that might be benevolent would have more creative ways for healing than just kicking.
No, I agree. Or flooding people. Like you get to the 6th chapter of the Bible and everybody drowns.
Sure.
Yeah, seriously. I mean, like, this is why you don't give this to children. This is why, like, new believers say, start with Genesis. Oh, no. 5 years we'll get to Genesis. There are a lot of other things to look at and ways of reading the Bible you need to get used to before you get to that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, see, this gets us to that perennial topic. Is the Bible telling us exactly what God is like? Like, if you peer behind the curtain, that's what you see. Or are we seeing how they understandably and authentically experience God in cultures, right? What kind of a God is it who's so angry by chapter 6 of the Bible, everybody dies? Well, listen, all ancient cultures have flood stories. And in that ancient part of the world, probably the reason is because there was at least one, maybe two cataclysmic floods in antiquity that wiped things out. Not the whole earth, but that region of Mesopotamia. And ancient peoples attribute that to the activities of the gods. And all these ancient cultures have explanations for why did the gods do this to us? That's the mentality. The Israelites had their story, why did God do this to us? And their answer was not being what we were created to be, which is, beings that give life and that are connected to God and obedient to God, not in an adversarial relationship with God, which is very different than the other ancient stories, right? So, Israel has, the flood story theologically is very interesting. But they're interpreting, let's say, a natural event, a flood, as an act of God, right? And we don't do that today. We have reasons that we can explain differently for why there are floods. Things you can actually test and look at, like here's why rains come.
I heard there are
right?
floods because of homosexuals in America.
I heard that too until Jon Stewart said, may be blessed forever, Jon Stewart, but. When he said once on the show a couple of years ago, yeah, exactly, where I'm from, he said, it's funny that God's wrath always shows up during hurricane season, which that essentially encapsulates the problem that we have, right? But you see, on the other hand, what I remember distinctly, when the tsunamis in the mid-2000s, in 2005, 2004 to 2006, in that time period, I'm watching the news and there are people saying, why would God do this? We still ask the same kind of question that ancient people did, right? And the answer is, maybe like Jesus' answer, you didn't do anything. You didn't do anything to deserve this, but still somehow, well, with Jesus, you're going to see God's glory and God's presence with you now, right? I hold on to that kind of a notion rather than, and that's a different way of explaining, like, the violence of the Bible, or not attributing a flood to something people did and God is so upset. Like, apparently there's no plan B here. The only thing to do is just kill people, right? I do not believe remotely that describes God. What it does is describes how people understood God, and I want to take that seriously. What are they saying? But where does this story go? So you can't just.
Means you're just picking and choosing what you want.
I am certainly picking and choosing. We all pick and choose. We have to pick and choose. Life is about picking and choosing wisely, right? But rather than just, picking and choosing, that already presumes that the entire Bible is equally ultimate. All parts have like an equal permanency and ultimacy. I'd like to look at the Bible, as many other people do, as a narrative that moves and changes and develops and gets complex, has resolutions, has surprising twists and turns, where at the end you sort of appreciate where the story has gone, but you don't go back to say, well, that beginning part is everything. Yeah. See, this is the problem with the fact that Genesis 1 to 11 is so difficult to understand. And many people will say, well, the beginning of the Bible has to be crystal clear. God wouldn't want to confuse us. And so this has to be understood literally and permanently. And I think that's the sound of God laughing, because you don't take that permanently or literally. You do what Jews have done and what Christians have done, is understood the role of story and metaphor and symbolism. That gets at something of what God is like. That is beyond sort of, literal history is not the only place God shows up. And I think that's the conservative idol, to say that God only can show up this way. That's boring. I could be wrong.
Well,
I don't think I am.
How do you, you said that, but how would we suggest this? Like, how should we read the Bible, and how should we not approach Scripture?
I don't think there's a 10-point pamphlet for like how to approach the Bible, yes, or do's and don'ts of reading the Bible. I would say, read maybe a gospel like Mark, because it's the shortest, and maybe, a couple of books in the New Testament, like maybe Philippians or James, and then maybe we'll look at Psalms or something. But I wouldn't read the Bible is a problematic book. Why do I say that? Because I don't like the Bible? No, I actually love the Bible, but it's a problematic book. How do I know that? Look at the history of interpretation. So many differences of opinion, so many people grappling with what it means. I'm not going to say, oh, it means this, right? So the Bible has problems in it that sort of need to be solved or addressed, that you need to have gone around the block a few times before you can really begin sort of even articulating what the problem is. When people, like, say, are coming into faith, it's nice to give them a Bible, but you also need to sort of work with them and train them, and which can be one-on-one, it can be in classes, whatever. But the Bible's not, here are all your answers. Take everything here as being absolutely, permanently, actually true. Don't argue with anything. If you do, read those portions of the Old Testament, what happens to people when God is angry with them, right? The book is for the mature. It can raise the neophyte or the beginner with community guidance. It's not just me and my Bible. See, that's the individualism that I think is difficult. People need to be trained and raised in the faith. I think
like communists, is that what you're saying?
Well, community, yeah, sure, why not? Even the money part, maybe. Read the book of Acts.
Cut.